Welcome to the Deep Dive Podcast. Becoming the dad God has called you to be takes a deeper dive. Dads too often stay at surface level. So let's dive deep into today's podcast.
Welcome to the Dad Deep Dive video podcast. My name is Seth and I'm your host for this incredible podcast series. Today we kick off our Dad Deep Dive podcast, which is a part of Dad U Online. We want to thank you for joining us on Dad Deep Dive. It's going to be a powerful time. This first podcast, this first discussion is with Kenny Martin. Kenny Martin is the pastor of Living Stones Church, and he leads a passionate organization there that does so much for the community of Magnolia. Today, his topic is, what does DNA have to do with dads? He is very vulnerable and opens up about his own life experiences as a stepfather and truly just a father who has taken the mantle of being dad with his girls. It's an incredible time. Jeff sits down with him and they have an incredible discussion. I'm so excited that you're here to join in with us and to enjoy it. So without much more, here you go.
Well, hey Kenny, man, it's great to have you here.
It's really.
I'm so excited. You do know that you are the inaugural podcast, so no pressure.
Okay,
no pressure on that, man. And one thing about this, I think neither one of us have a problem talking.
No, not at all.
Especially things we're passionate about.
Right.
We were just talking about that.
Yeah.
So I have Kenny Martin here, Pastor Kenny Martin, and we have a long history together, and I'm just so proud. Who would have thought that almost 18 years ago that we would be doing something like this together? But anyway, so we're going to talk about, your title today is, what does DNA have to do with dads? But before I get there, I want you to talk a little bit. Okay, so you're a pastor at Living Stones Church in Magnolia, Texas,
right?
And I want you to talk a little bit about that. But prior to that, you are a current retired sergeant with the Houston Police Department. Talk a little bit about that.
Okay. I wanted to be a police officer probably from the 6th grade. Our house a man tried to burglarize it in the morning. A policeman came to the scene, and then when I got off the bus, he was waiting for me, took me home, went through my house first, and I had a very utmost respect for police then. I went to the station, I hung out with them, and I wanted to be a policeman. And I joined the Houston Police Department in 1982. I turned 19 October 30th. February 4th, I was in the police academy. Couldn't grow a mustache, but I was in the police academy. June, I was graduated and patrolling the streets of the 5th Ward, which was the highest crime rate in the city of Houston at the time. And during the 1982 year, it went to the murder capital of the United States. It surpassed Detroit. And I patrolled the streets in the 5th Ward. I wanted to make a difference in people's lives. And I had that opportunity through police department. I decided I never wanted to go anywhere but maybe the Bronx afterwards, if I could leave 5th Ward and go to the night shift the Bronx. But I got married, started having children, and I then promoted. And when I promoted, I became a cop's cop. I worked Internal Affairs. But I had a calling in the back of my heart for holding men accountable, and I started Peace Officers for Christ. And we ran that ministry for 6 years. And we had Bible studies and just a mentorship to other men and other ladies in the police department, because you get tied up with the law enforcement. You see bad and dying all the time. And when you do that, you tend to believe that if you don't wear a uniform, you must be a bad guy. And so there's a lot of things, walls that need to be knocked down. And I see that today, particularly in the things that we're dealing with in Minnesota and Seattle, Washington. The wall needs to come down between the citizens and the police. So I spent there. I was April 25th, 1989. I was hit head on in a police car and put down into it was 13 foot from the top of the culvert to the top of the road. And my foot got caught between the door and the brake pedal, and it shattered my ankle. 3 people waiting on a bus pulled me from the car, and they black two black men, black lady, 82 years old, pulled me from the car, called 911, and waited on the side of the road with me until they got there. One of them I'd put in jail before. I put him in jail for beating up his grandmother and taking her Social Security check. And he told the officers that got there, I know Officer Martin, when they asked him how, he told them. And he said, but he treated me like a man, not like a dog. And through the years, they sent me home in a wheelchair, said I'd never walk again. And 10 months later, I was back on the job, and God had different plans. And 10 years after the original accident, degenerative arthritis set in. I went back to the doctor because it hurt so bad, and he said, I can fuse it, but I think you're too young, but I think you're a prime candidate for an ankle replacement. He said, but you will be the first one in the United States to have it done. And so I prayed about it, and we did it. And then the city called me and said, Sergeant, City Council didn't approve your extension of workman's comp. We docked all your sick, vacation, and comp time, and you owe the city $9,000 in back pay. And I thought, what? Who? But I knew that was God pushing me out of the nest. And I know he called me to full-time ministry. And so we went full-time ministry. I started as a youth pastor, and then I pastored a few churches, and I started a coffee house, a Christian coffee house with the live music. That's where the men's ministry grew from. And it's been awesome from that point on. I wouldn't change anything I do.
So that experience in the Houston Police Department really was a ministry itself. So when I said prior to ministry, really you have always done ministry. And I think that's one thing that men don't recognize in their current professions. They think that what they do is not a possibility or present opportunities for ministries. And you definitely were in the people business, on the streets, ministering to people just in a different uniform.
Right.
And so obviously that was great preparation for what you do now as pastor at Livingstone's Church in Magnolia, Texas. So you're married, you have 3 grown children.
I do.
And you have 4 grandchildren and 1 more on the way.
1 on the way.
That's awesome.
Yeah. There's
nothing like being a grandpa, is there?
Oh, man.
My gosh.
I said if I knew how much fun this would have been, I'd have had grandkids first. But yeah.
So Kenny, with your police background, maybe I understand a little bit more with your title, with the DNA part of it. So why today's title? Why does DNA what does DNA have to do with dads?
We live in a society. When I was a kid, my parents got a divorce, and I was one of 2 kids in my entire class that didn't have the same mom and dad together. And then when I started having children, my boys are a year apart. One graduated in 06, the other one in 07. Jennifer was in 03. By the time my boys were in elementary school, my youngest came home in the 2nd grade, and he said, Mom, when do I get a stepdad? And I thought, is there something your mother needs to tell me? But they associated that with gifts. He was one of 2 kids in his entire class that had the same mom and dad together. And we've seen the society change. And we have the mine, yours, and ours mentality. And when my parents got a divorce at 12, I needed a father figure in my life. All kids need a father figure in their life. And if we don't have it in the home, we find it somewhere else. And that could be in gangbangers, that could be in sports, that could be in work. We try to fill that void. I want somebody to tell me, hey, when I see Susie, I get butterflies in my stomach. Why, Dad? I want to be able to watch my dad shave and learn how to shave, learn how to be a man from that man. And it's I thrived for that, and I thrived for that in my stepfather, and I never got it. I had a bunch of jealousy. He called me the king when he was drinking and getting high, and so I never had a relationship with him. It was always a fight, and I put up a wall. And I thought, nobody will ever make me cry. Nobody will ever get to my feelings. And when I hit the streets, I was very cold also. And there's some things happened in my life that I had that cold heart being chipped away, I walked away from God, because when my parents went through a divorce, the church would look at me and they'd talk. You know, I heard my best friend's mother say, "Hey, Kenny's his parents are going through a divorce. Go get our son and bring him back over here." Kind of like a plague.
Yeah.
And I wanted that man figure. Every boy growing up has a God-given desire to be a man and to be taught how to be a man. And if there's not a man figure in that life, the devil will always put a man figure in that is not intended. And that's where we get all kinds of problems. We get people that follow the wrong people. We get people that idolize sports figures, and they have a preconceived idea of things that are going on. So I wanted that man figure in my life. Now, when I worked the Fifth Ward during Easter, during Christmas, I would buy kids gifts. When I was single, I spent my whole check buying Easter baskets for kids, doing things for them. I was involved with removing some kids from their homes, so CPS was involved with me, and I became a father figure to these kids in the Fifth Ward. I coached, and when I coached, I had kids that didn't have dads around, and these dads didn't have nothing to do with them. And we think that it's an argument between my wife and I based on how much child support I should give, but really the child sees that and says, why does he not want to help me? Why does he not love me? That I want to play ball and I need a new glove, and he's saying his child support should pay for my glove. And so the kid's put in the middle, and they don't have that father figure. And now I'm going to get a little personal. I fell in love with a woman who at the time had an 11-month-old daughter. And I was the first man other than her brother to pick this little girl up where she wanted me to pick her up. And we were very close. And when I asked her mother to marry me, I had started the process to adopt her. She carried my last name before her mother did. And when we went to get married, I bought her diamond earrings, and I bought her mother a diamond ring. And so she'd tell everybody, I'm going to the church to marry my daddy. Mommy and I are going to marry daddy. And my daughter and I became very close, and she's the one that taught me how to be a dad. And I had to learn very quickly, and I made mistakes, and she's the one that I made the mistakes with. However, if I had my way, I told my wife I would never tell her that I wasn't her biological dad. And there was a point that I knew I had to tell her that I was not her biological father. But it wasn't until she was in junior high and she was snooping for Christmas presents that she found her baby book. And in the baby book was certified letters to the biological father, who he returned unopened. And so there was an open letter from my wife to her that said, I've done everything that your biological dad could learn to who you were, and it's his missing, and it's not yours. It's nothing you did. Well, you know, when a child reaches adolescence, they're thinking, there's a man out there that helped make me. Why doesn't he have anything to do with me? And she went searching for her dad, and she found him. And he had just gotten out of prison for beating up his third wife. And he didn't see her as a daughter. He saw her as a gorgeous, well, you know my daughter. She was runner-up to Miss Magnolia the first time they brought it back. She's 5'11", blonde hair, blue-eyed, drop-dead gorgeous. I tell everybody she stole her good looks from her dad because her mom still has hers. But I was active in her life. I was there. I was the daddy figure. I bought her first car. I was there when she got hurt. I was there when she went to the hospital, and daddy was next to her. And people would say to my wife, that's amazing. And she said, what's amazing? Kenny makes no difference between your daughter and his boys, because the boys are biologically mine, but all of them are mine. That's my baby. To this day, she calls, hey, Daddy, I need you. And I'm jumping in a car and I'm going to Austin. That's my baby girl. We tend to have jealousy, and that is, if I marry somebody that has a child, that's somebody else's child. And that's where my stepfather was. that is somebody else's child. And so he called me the king, and there was never a relationship there. Now, my brother, who is 6 years younger than me, there was a relationship between him and my brother. And that's because he was younger. He didn't see him as a threat. But all we're looking for is somebody to teach me, be a man in my life. My daughter will learn how to be loved by her husband based on how I love her mom and how I love her. And she will also learn how to love her husband based on how mommy loves me and the relationship that I have with her. And if I've got a wall up there that she's not mine, she's not going to learn. Yeah. Father's love is what is the difference between functionality and dysfunctionality in the home. Yeah. And that's the dad.
Well, you wrote, when we grow up, we have a decision to make. That we can be the father that we had, or that we can be the father that we want to be, or wanted.
My dad worked all the time. My dad he was a machine repairman. There's nothing made he couldn't fix. He was self-taught. When he got out of high school, he married my mother, and my dad was an All-American basketball player. 1959, he averaged over 22 points a game without a three-point line. And people wanted him to play ball. And he got married instead and had me. And I tell him now, look, Dad, you could have been a millionaire. But he had to go to work to support his family, and he went to work for a machine business, and he learned the trade of machine repairman. Well, his idea in his head was to provide, to be the provider. And my dad's the greatest provider I've ever known. He worked, and he owned a business on the side. He worked all the time. And that's where I got my drive from my dad. However, I was the kid that Dad wasn't at the baseball games. I was the kid that Dad wasn't at the football games. And I'd look up at the stands because Johnny's got his dad. Jeff's got his dad. Where's mine? And even though my mother showed up, there's still the daddy figure that's not showing up. And my dad worshiped money. And I later saw that my grandfather did the same thing. And so you learn from what you're being taught. And I couldn't hold my dad accountable for not showing me what I desired because he never had it in his. But I had a decision to make. Be the dad that I had, a workaholic, which I was at times, or be the dad that I always desired. And I know that my daughter desired the man's attention, a father who's a protector, a father who's there to love her, dote on her, tell her how beautiful she was. And I had that decision. Be the dad that I had, or be the dad that I wanted. Now, in all due respect, God has changed my father, and things have changed, and we have a great relationship now. But at a time, there wasn't a good relationship there. And I didn't want that with my kids. I wanted my kids to look back. Well, the biggest accomplishment in my life was my son's yearbook when he was at your school. And the yearbook staff came out and said, tell me your hero. And some of his friends said, this quarterback or this defensive end. And they interviewed Kenny, and he said, my hero's my dad. And that's what we should strive for, is to be. I want him always to know Christ, but if I portray Christ to him, then I'm going to be his hero in his life.
Yeah, you said something, really, you've seen a lot of things that are very important for our listeners to heed. You talked about one of the greatest gifts that you can give your kids is to love their mom, your wife. And I think sometimes we forget that as men. We go straight to the kids, and which is, we're always, divorce does happen, unfortunately, and we will always be those kids' father. But in the marriage, I think, like you said, if we don't show our own kids how to love the spouse, then how are they going to do that when they grow up? Everything is a model and example. Hopefully how they're going to treat their spouse and how they're going to treat others. And I think when we're young, we don't always, we just wonder, we think about what like you were talking about what your dad couldn't give you. When we're young, we don't really, it's not till we become older do we realize, why dad is the way he is, or why mom is the way she is, and that we can find that forgiveness in our heart and reconcile that and so forth. But, you being this kind of the cycle breaker, what was that you said even when you went into the police academy or into your career as a policeman, there was a time where you were still hardened, going into that. So what changed that?
I worked at 5th Ward, which was the highest crime rate in the city of Houston, and it was also poverty, high poverty, and the majority of the people that are there are minorities. And I watched, I looked at these kids, and my heart broke for these kids. Where's your dad? I don't know. As I studied later, you find out that the Hallmark came to the prisons, and they brought Mother's Day cards, and they didn't have enough, and they had to go back and get more Mother's Day cards. And so they thought, well, here comes Father's Day. We better bring as many as we had with the mothers, and a third of them were taken. And when they talked to the prisoners, they said, why? I don't even know who he is. Or the biggest thing was, he's the reason I'm here. And you see a cycle where, and I think that there's a lot of contributing factors, including welfare. Hey, I'll give you more money if you leave her. And so the devil plays right into that scheme. And so you've got kids that grow up and have kids, and they do the same thing their dads did. And that cycle needs to be broken. Doesn't matter whether you're black, white, Hispanic, Asian. It needs to be broken. And the broken is, it takes one. Like you and I talked earlier about when you build a men's ministry, give me 3 guys that have a heart for men and watch what can happen. If God can turn the world upside down with 12 guys, what's he going to do with 100 men? What's he going to do with 3 that become 12, that become 40, that become, now you have 30 huddle groups. And I saw the pain that I had, and I didn't have that relationship with my dad. And I said, I don't ever want that. I want my kids to come to me. I want them to, and I joke about it now. My boys are in their 30s. My daughter's knocking on the door of 40. And I'll go to their house and I'll see one of my tools hanging from their rack, and I'll say, where'd you get that? And I'd laugh and joke with them, and I say, oh, you bought it at Dad's R Us. But I don't want them to go any other place. I want me to be their first earthly vessel that they reach out. I want God to be their first focus where they reach out to him. But I want that relationship when they call me, they're not embarrassed. They don't feel less of a man when they say, hey, Dad, I'm struggling. Have you got a couple $100 I can borrow till payday? There's nothing wrong with that. I'm their dad. I can't take it with me. And I want them to, and I go over and help them. I've helped both boys build their fences. That's time together. Even just building a fence. My son redid a 63 Chevy pickup truck, and then come and pick me up and his brother for my birthday. And we cruised around and went and ate barbecue. That's what it needs to be, the relationship that when your children leave the home, it's not they're gone. I think I struggled the worst with the empty nest syndrome because of I worked at keeping that relationship with my kids. And I hated that they were gone. And now that my son is a pastor of media and production in Asheville, North Carolina, that's 1,400 miles away, man. And I long for the days that we Zoom or the days that we FaceTime each other, because that relationship, and it has to be broken. It has to be stopped. Jesus came and he stopped the yearly killing of animals to pay for your sins, and he did it once and for all. And the relationship that we have with him should be mirrored in the relationship that we have with our earthly children also. And so I wanted to be that dad that I wished I had, and I wanted them to see the model, and I want them to stand on my shoulders and jump from here. They're far better dads than I ever was at that age, and that's what I wanted.
Well, Kenny, I just want to say, when I go back to your title, what does DNA have to do with dads or being a dad? I can say, this is the honest truth. maybe I knew it once upon a time, but I never knew your daughter was your stepdaughter. So that tells me that I saw no difference in as their principal, and as you being their parent, and the involvement in all of their lives. I saw no difference between how you treated your boys and your daughter.
Now my boys will counter that.
Well, she's the girl.
She's always my favorite.
Well, she's the baby, and she is the girl.
Yeah.
And you do it. I have a boy and a girl myself, and I just have one boy and one girl. And so I can treat them differently. If I had a second boy or second girl, I'd have to figure that out. I'm sure God would help me navigate that. He has a real sense of humor. He gave me 2 granddaughters, so I can't I have to love them the same and different ways. But I can't hold one over the other. But that is a tribute to you and authentic as you live into what you're talking about, because if I knew, I didn't remember that your daughter was your stepdaughter.
The greatest thing that ever happened, Jeff, was my daughter. I walked her down the aisle. I got on my hands and knees and I put a penny in her shoe, just tradition, and I prayed over her. And she said, "Daddy, I told you not to do this. I'm not going to cry on my wedding." Later on, she showed me her driver's license. And her name was Jennifer Danielle Martin. And she had it after she got married. She went and had it legally changed to Jennifer Martin Lane. And when she showed me her driver's license, I said, "Why did you change your middle name? It's beautiful." She said, "Because, Daddy, I never wanted to lose your name. I never want to lose your name." And that speaks volumes to, was I a perfect dad? Oh, heck no. I learned a lot from her, and I still do. But my boys are in their 30s, and they'll still tell me, "She's your favorite. She's your favorite. She's a little girl. She's Daddy's little girl. She's 5'11", but she's Daddy's little girl."
Yeah.
And to this day, she'll come and for Christmas or holidays, or she's just coming to go through Houston, and she'll watch a movie and crawl up in Daddy's lap. And that is the joy of my heart, to see my daughter as an adult, a very successful business lady, crawling up in the arms of her daddy and asking for that comfort. Yeah.
Well, Kenny, there are going to be men that are going to be watching this. This being a podcast on Dad University. What would you say to our audience, to these men that God's going to send to this podcast about the importance of being a dad?
Dads go far further than just production. I've said this before. It takes a male to have a child. It takes a man to be a daddy. My wife got me for my birthday a plaque. It was a wooden plaque. It stood about 10 inches tall, and it folded in half. And carved on one side, it says, "Anybody can be a father. It takes somebody special to be a daddy." And on this side was a hole for a picture. And in that picture was myself on an Easter Sunday with my daughter on one knee and my son, the only one that was born then, in my arm. And that picture was there. I had it on my nightstand, and I had it there for years. And my daughter went to college, and I couldn't find it anymore. I tore that house apart. I thought it fell back behind the nightstand. Maybe it went underneath the bed. I searched everywhere and couldn't find it. My wife didn't know what happened to it. And I went to move her in her sophomore year at college to her apartment to her junior year. And there it was on the nightstand next to her bed. And I said, "You stole Dad's picture." And she said, "You always said I taught you how to be a dad, so I'm taking that with me." It's far more than just DNA. And I'll go even a step further. Divorce happens. That's not the child's fault. And we tend to put the children in the middle of it. And we need to realize, number one, my son or daughter is going to learn how to respect others through the way I respect their mom. The two of you couldn't get along. I understand that. And you're divorced. God didn't intend for that, but so be it. Take care of that child. Don't put that child in the middle. Don't be saying, well, I pay child support. That should pay for your baseball glove.
Right.
Or I pay enough to her. Or put them in the middle. What's your dad doing? What's your mother doing? Don't you ever call that man daddy. He's your stepdaddy.
Yeah.
And then the I call them special daddies, not stepdaddies. Special dads take the responsibility of that child also. And don't ever let that child hear, your dad ought to pay for this. You're his. When you marry that lady, you marry that family. I have a guy that I worked with and mentored, and he got married into a situation that she had a son from a previous marriage. And I told him at that time, be his daddy. Be his daddy. And it wasn't long that he was calling him daddy. And the father had nothing to do with this child until this friend of mine filled out the paperwork to adopt him. Oh, now he wants to be the devoted dad. Hasn't paid child support in 6 years, but he wants to be the devoted dad now. And they went to court. And everything that this man did to not be with his father came up in court. And as it was, my friend got custody. He got to adopt that boy. The greatest day of his life was the day that he took his daddy's name. And he told people, I get my daddy's name now. And his daddy wasn't biologically his. But he also was born with a special needs. And that man takes off from work, takes him to the doctors, is there through the therapy. That's my boy. That's my boy. And this kid's self-esteem rose so much that he's excelling in school. He's excelling now socially with other people. It is dads. Be a dad. Just because it wasn't biologically your, and to go a step further, in the church, be dads to these kids that don't have dads. Love on them. I remember as a kid, they probably would be frowned on today, but we had an usher in the church, and he always had a sport coat, and a sport coat always filled with the big 25-cent gumballs. When we were kids, I think they were 2 cents, but he would have them in his pocket, and he'd say, hey, Kenny, how you doing? I'm doing good. Have you been good this week? Oh, yeah. You want me to ask your parents? No.
Yeah.
But he'd say, hey, come on, because you're being honest, here, put your hand in and get one. And you'd get a gumball. And all the kids in the church knew, and he loved you, and he put his arm around you. He just had a knack of seeing when a child needs to be hugged.
Yeah.
And we can do that. We can hug these kids. And when you hear of a need, we heard of a need the other day. A young boy was playing ball, and his glove was wore out, and he needed a new glove. Well, we went and bought him a new glove, and you'd have thought we bought him a new house.
Yeah.
Those things speak volumes in these kids. Know that you love them, and they know when people love them or not.
Yeah, and as well as I do, Kenny, there are a lot of single moms out there that have an ex that's not involved. They have children that needs that dad figure. Whether it's a church member or a neighbor, dad. We have a man that has spoken at Dad University. It has his title is called Divorced but Devoted. There's a lot of men out there that don't know how to maintain that relationship through a divorce, and they just need a little encouragement that we want you as men, as husbands, to love your wife, but if a divorce does happen, that doesn't mean that you walk and divorce your kids as well. You will always be the dad. And I love the encouragement, though, that you make for stepdads, and that calling to be the dad and to be that. And I appreciate you. I'm so grateful for you. The many memories I have of you are the countless events that you were at for all of your kids at school, and your joy and your love for them. And so I want to thank you, Kenny, for being here today. I want to thank you for being the dad, for being that daily active, devoted dad that God has called you and He's called me to be.
I appreciate that, and I want to thank God for you, because a lot of times things that are bitter in life, they leave a bitterness in us, and so to take over that bitterness, we're not going to do anything with our ex-wife, or we're not going to do anything. And you're opening people's eyes to be a dad, to be accountable, to love your kids, to love your special kids instead of step kids, and to be that person. And when we love, not based on DNA, but based on what God says, then I'm going to tell you that we're not going to see the riots in the street that we see. We're not going to see the things. Crime rate will go down because these kids have self-esteem, and they now know who they are in life because they got a man that loves them and pours into them.
That's right. That's right.
Thanks.
You're right.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Kenny.
Yeah.
Such powerful moments, such vulnerability that Kenny was able to share with us. I hope it impacted you. I hope that this has helped you in your own dad journey, whether it's with stepkids, foster kids, or your own biological children. Either way, we are so excited about this movement of Dad U Online and the Dad Deep Dive podcast. You can subscribe to the audio version or the video version right here. Either way, we are glad that you've joined us, that you've signed up, that you've suited up, because you truly are making the difference of being the dad that God has called you to be here with Suit Up Ministries and in your community. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you on the next one.